It's official. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. And I'm so thrilled to have KJ Charles with us here today. We have been talking about KJ's books for years in our romance book club. But before we get started with questions, I wanted to just do a few little housekeeping things. We are recording and we are live on Facebook. You can ask, you can ask questions from Facebook. We will be taking questions from there if you're there. You can put your questions in the Q&A and use the chat for comments and tech issues. We'll be paying attention to that. I'd like to thank our romance book club, which has been, like I said, meeting for several years and talking about KJ that entire time, in betwixt other authors. And I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Library who support all of our adult programming. I'd also like to remind you that you can buy signed books from Bank Square Books. KJ sent out some book plates to them recently, and if anybody here knows me, you know that I think that signed books are gold, and someday you'll be able to sell them like on eBay and they'll go for like thousands and thousands of dollars. I can't do that. They're like my children, but some people do. We will put the link for the Bank Square Books in the chat in just a minute. So I would like to welcome KJ Charles to our stage. Just a really quick bio of her, because she doesn't have a lot on her website, that she was a publisher in the UK with Mills Boon, but now she's a full-time writer. She lives in London with her husband, 2 kids, an out-of-control garden, and an increasingly murderous cat. I'm waiting for my cat to come in and like sort of like, you know, so we could have like dueling
I've got 4 shots.
Oh, 4. Oh my gosh, my husband would kill me. KJ writes mostly historical romance, often with some fantasy or horror in there. Her paranormal romance, Spectred Isle, is a 2018 RITA nominee, and it's fabulous if you haven't read it. And Allison Choi, who's here with me today, is going to be helping me moderate questions because she has read every single KJ Charles book. She has recommended KJ Charles to everybody she knows. And I believe, even though she owns all of your books, KJ, she actually bought a bunch of signed ones for this program. There she goes. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the first question, and we'll be taking questions intermixed as well as at the end. So feel free, like I said, to put your questions in the Q&A. So my question for you, KJ, to start, and I bet you get this question all the time, is how do you, as a woman, write romance? And is that why you go by KJ, so there's no assumptions made about your books?
I actually go with KJ because it sounds really like my actual name, and if people call me by it, then I turn around and listen. Whereas if I went by Laura, for example, then I just wouldn't have a clue that you were talking to me. And that is genuinely the reason. It's also my initial and my daughter's initial as well. Doesn't include my son's initial, and he's really annoyed about that. So no, plus I thought at the time that initials were a really good idea, never having realised that as soon as you start putting them into Goodreads, it messes everything up, and that if you have a publisher whose house style is to put full stops in it, then you end up with 2 author identities at the various audio publishers. So actually my advice is not to do that and to use a name rather than initials, because it's a pain. However, how do I write it? Like I write everything that isn't most of the people I write aren't my identity, because I'm a fairly straightforward, fundamentally cis, heterosexual, white woman, middle class Brit, and the British part is the only thing I write an awful lot of. And you know, because that's not, there are plenty of books by cis-het white middle class women out there about cis-het white middle class women. It's not that exciting. And I don't just, I wanted to write and explore and think about and learn about other people. And I feel that that's what fiction is about, really. It's getting into other heads. So the answer of how you do it is you read a lot, you listen a lot, you research a lot, you think a lot, you check a lot. Yeah. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, have you ever gotten any kind of pushback or confusion around that?
Not really, because I don't, I make it clear who I am, and I tend to find most readers, they I don't think many. I mean, the Own Voices movement has done a lot of good, but it's also been quite stressful for a lot of authors in a lot of ways that I think have come out recently. The person who came up with the Own Voices idea has actually rolled back from it because of the amount of pressure that's been put on authors to be the perfect representation of their identity or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, put pressure on authors that they have to write their own identity and not something else, which a lot of people simply don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not entirely straightforward, I think it's fair to say.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main thing is that not to pretend to be something you're not. Exploiting the desire of people to read own voices falsely is, I think, disgraceful. But I think if you're simply saying, I have written a story, then people can make their own decisions as to whether they want to read it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Alison?
So the final book of your Will Darling Adventures trilogy, Subtle Blood, was released in June. Was, of course, a fantastic end to that series. Can you talk about the inspiration for the titles in that series? I thought the titles were really great. So like book 1 is Slippery Creatures, book 2 is The Sugared Game, and then of course the final was Subtle Blood for book 3.
Okay, so that series is very heavily based in Golden Age sort of pulp novels, which I'm a huge fan of. And one of the things about Golden Age pulp novels is they go mad on using Shakespeare quotes as their titles. I mean, if you look at Ngaio Marsh, for example, or Patricia Wentworth, constantly using Shakespeare quotes as the titles. So I knew that there was going to be a Shakespeare connection in the first book, and I actually based it on my father's favourite quote in all of Shakespeare, which comes from Timon of Athens. So I thought to myself, I might just trawl through Timon of Athens and see if I come up with some good titles, because, if I'm tapping into the 1920s Golden Age pulp, I might as well go the whole hog. So yes, they are all, in fact, lines from Timon of Athens. As I did two sort of freebies, book 2.5 and a series epilogue. And they're also from Timon of Athens. So I managed to keep the whole thing going consistently, which is very satisfying. But also I can see why people nick their titles from Shakespeare, because they're really good, and there's loads of them. I mean, I had a choice of about 7 I'd have gone for. And Slippery Creatures in particular, I mean, that's a fantastic. Plus, nobody's read Timon of Athens except basically me and like one other reader who's actually acted in it. And everyone else is like, what is this play? So nobody's going, oh, what a cliche.
But when you picked those titles, did they have something that connected with you in terms of the story?
Definitely. So book 1 is very much about you've got this very straightforward soldier, Will, who finds himself in an espionage type situation with a highly unreliable love interest. So Kim is the slippery creature. He's about as slippery as it gets. Then The Sugared Game is actually very relevant. I won't give it away, but it is super relevant to the plot. In fact, I found a really lovely piece of genuine 1920s sort of shenanigans that criminals were getting up to, which is sugar related. I actually thought when I was writing it might be about saccharin smuggling, because did you know they used to smuggle saccharin? Yep, it was hugely taxed, so it was hugely valuable. So you read in 1920s pulp that you've got people who are running heroin, cocaine and saccharin, which doesn't really sound like 3 things you put together, does it? And then Subtle Blood is about Kim, who is the second son of a marquess, having to confront his ghastly aristocratic family, plus there's a murder. So, all of the titles actually fitted extremely nicely with what I had in mind. So I was very happy. Plus they all sort of begin with S, and yeah, it was very satisfying. I might do that again.
Alison, did you have a follow-up thought to that? No, okay. So what was your favorite book and series to write? Now, this is always an interesting question to me for authors, because they're like your children, right?
No, they're not like my children.
Oh.
My children are downstairs making a nuisance of themselves.
Oh no.
No, it's a tricky one. I mean, So there's books that I like more having written them. For example, Subtle Blood was an absolute pig to write. It was a monster. I wrote a lengthy blog post about what a monster it was to write. And that's partly because of the pandemic, and it was partly because it was book 3 of a series. And it was just awful. It took me 10 months. And I'm really, really, really pleased with it. So having finished, yeah, it's delightful. While doing it, I could have actually set fire to it, you know. The books that came most easily, The Gentle Art of Fortune Hunting, which is a super tropey, light on the conflict, Regency romance, where I was absolutely just going for Heya but Gayer. And that was really, that was just a dream to write. And I basically wrote it to distract myself from the fact that I needed to write Subtle Blood. So that was like, whatever the writing equivalent of retail therapy is. And the other was Jackdaw, which is many people, it's one of my more controversial books because it stars a villain from the previous trilogy, and many people absolutely hate the hero, and it's super angsty. And that just went like a dream. I mean, I've never written, I mean, that was writing itself. I think I had one day where I wrote 10,000 words. It was just, it was that wrote itself, that one. Mm-hmm. So yeah, more like that, please.
Alison, I think you had a question about Jackdaw, right?
Yeah, so like you said, your first book series, Charm of Magpies, you have Lord Crane, Stephen Day, everybody loves those characters. And then in Jackdaw, you switch perspectives, and Jonah, who's like a bad guy, becomes the main character. And now, you know, the reader kind of finds themselves rooting against Stephen a bit, even though they know Stephen's perspective and love Stephen. And I thought it was a really like thought-provoking thing to do, or kind of risky. And or did you think it was like taking a risk? And, you know, what did you want readers to think
about? I did think it was taking a risk. And indeed, there are some people who just, they can't forgive the thing that Jonah does at the end of the 3rd book of the Magpies trilogy. There are some people who just, they can't get over that. But and that's fair enough. You know, I wanted people to be deeply emotionally engaged with it. But one of the things I think is important to remember is that nobody's the villain in their own version of the story. And most people probably do have a point if you actually listen to them, and they do have reasons. And, you know, it's never quite as simple and as black and white as things are made out to be. And it's looking at things from different perspectives is informative. There's a George Eliot's line in Middlemarch where she talks about, you know, how mirrors used to be made of polished steel, and they'd be polished with steel wool, so they were basically very scratched. And if you hold a candle up to one, you highlight concentric rings around the candle flame. If you can imagine it, all the scratches form a ring around the candle flame, and then you move the candle, and suddenly the ring is around the candle flame over there, and it looks, wherever you hold the candle, the scratches make it look like it's the center of the world, but you move it, and do you see what I'm getting at? She puts it rather better than me because she's George Eliot, but that's it. It's really important. Just moving the candle in Jackdaw actually tells you, well, actually this guy, he seemed careless, and he seemed not to have any morals, and he seemed to be just recklessly and cruelly acting like that, had his reasons. And I think there's actually a very important learning curve. Although the story of Stephen and Crane is finished basically in book 3 of The Charm of Magpies, there's actually something that Stephen has to learn in Jackdaw when he actually is trying to hunt Jonah down, and it's useful possibly for the reader to remember it. Also, no denying, it was just massive fun writing them as the antagonists, because they're not very, you know, for us, we read 3 books about their romance, they're lovely people, but from the other perspective, they're actually pretty ghastly, you know. So it's fun to do, and I do like to turn things on their heads just for practice. It's good for everyone.
We have noticed and enjoyed. In fact, I'm going to go off script a little bit because I have a question that has come up in several of our discussions about your books, is the power differential that happens between your characters, your 2 love interests, let's say, and how you resolve that within, you know, one story is pretty, just, we've been amazed by it, because, you know, it's not always done so well. So what is your thought about how you start out thinking about power in your books and how you resolve it?
Oof, I mean, it sort of differs with the situation, but I think the first thing is to actually, to create the situation and think about what the power imbalance is. Is it social class, which obviously I'm British, so that's huge. Is it knowledge, which is an important one? In Spectred Isle, the real gap is that one of them has no idea what's going on and the other one knows a great deal and won't tell. Same as the three creatures, in fact. Physical strength is a thing that you can't ignore. Race is an element. There's a huge amount. Intersectionality is basically what we're talking about here. There is wealth, obviously. So you've just got to look at the intersections and see how people are balanced and what would it take between them. Is it just going to take understanding? How is the one going to find an equilibrium? How are they going to come from the initial equilibrium to find a new one? And is anyone, do the participants actually understand their own power imbalance? And they don't all have to be massive. I was writing about this on my blog recently, because in the Will Darling adventures, for example, there's a whole load of power imbalances, some of which are like really important to both characters, and some of which are only important to one character, and some of which both characters are quite happy to ignore. And I think that's one of the that's how you could give 5 romance writers the same sort of character brief, and you could get 5 completely different books and interpretations of relationship. So Will and Kim, for example, Kim is very rich and Will isn't, and Will finds it annoying more than anything else, but he's really bothered by the class aspect, whereas Kim, as a privileged person, can afford to disregard the class aspect because it's not his problem. And there's there could be a power imbalance in the way they approach sex, but there isn't, because that's one of the few areas where they're actually able to connect the whole way through. But I could have done that completely differently. I could have had Will's inexperience and Kim's preferences be a massive issue, and so on. So yeah, I think as with so many things, the main thing is you think about it deeply and thoroughly and look at it from the angles and tease out what's going to be the most difficult.
But I mean, I think that is, from my perspective, because Allison's, I think you said, like, if you had to pick 5 books to take on a desert island, A Seditious Affair would be one of them. And for that,
crazy.
Yeah, and that one, I thought, in terms of the power, there's certainly the differential, but there was so much trust as well in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, that one is basically, one character is a working class radical who's already been jailed by the state and who is constantly at hazard. He's been flogged, he's fighting for equality in a completely unjust world. And the other one is the privileged man who's supposed to be putting people like him in prison. So obviously there's but they're in this DS relationship where they don't know who each other is. So they've actually developed a relationship where Silas, the working class man, has, sexually speaking, or appears to have, the upper hand, because he's the dominant and Dominic has a humiliation kink, and it's very it seems to be very much that he's got the power, although in fact he's very, very conscious of trying to do the right thing and do what Dominic wants, and that is what informs it when all the political power balance comes in, because Dominic is already looking at him as a human, not as a representative of his class and his politics, and that is how they're able eventually to achieve a happy ending. But it would have been, I don't know how you pull that off if you didn't have the fact that they've actually been lovers for a year before the story starts. I think if you came into it fresh, it wouldn't be possible, because there would just be too much to get over. But because they knew each other without knowing about this huge inequality, they were able to negotiate a way past the inequality, if only just. if that makes sense.
Totally does. I'm going to ask Allison a question actually of why that particular book was your favorite. What was it about it that really struck you?
I just think it's like a master class in like consent. Like I had to read it several times to pick up everything. Like at first, just I guess it's the connection between the characters. Like that your romances, I think, are always so unexpected. And that's what I really like about them. But then at the heart, your characters are always really good people, and that comes through, and you just root for them. And it's just your characters are so real, and like they feel so fleshed out. And I like how Silas is older, and just that book is just the dialogue between Silas and Dominic is fantastic, and that connection that they make is really special in that book, and that they can overcome so much. Like, and while it deals with a lot of like kind of darker things, like at the same time, like you're worried that they're not even going to make it alive to the end of the book, you're like laughing out loud, like with the Mistress Zoe scenes and things like that. It's just, or Foxy David. That book, it's amazing to me. Sorry, I'm not really speaking very intelligently about it, but it's fantastically done.
It was a tough book to write in some respects, and in others not, because I mean Silas is in many ways my own ideal romance hero. You know, you read so many Regency romances with dukes, and it's, you know, when you read the politics of the time, the heroes were the people who were actually fighting for equality in against one of the most oppressive governments that we've ever had. You know, and they were in a desperate situation. I mean, it was awful. And you know, I when I had him in my head, and you know, he's tired and he actually wants to give up. He's just been doing so much of it, and he's really tired. And you know, that spoke to me. Yeah, no, that is a book of my heart, A Seditious Affair. Just politically speaking, and because it very much says that, you know, if you're listening to the other person, if we just listen to one another, we can find these connections.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous.
No, or rather, but you know, that doesn't mean we accept everything about one another. But if we listen to one another, then we can actually start to change. And I think it's important that Dominic does change, and he changes his views. Mm-hmm. You know, in a way that I think is realistic for a man of his class, but nevertheless, he does change.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Allison, you have the next question, I guess. How goes the world?
Okay, yeah. Oh, so thank you so much for the How Goes the World epilogue. I'm sure all your readers are very excited. It came out in September. I'm sure it's like a reader's dream come true to see Daniel and Archie again from Think of England, and of course, Pat and Fen, and Bill and Jimmy from Proper English, and then with Will and Kim. And I can imagine readers must beg you all the time to write about their favorite characters again. And do you enjoy revisiting those characters? Are there some issues with doing that? And is it hard to get back in the headspace of characters when you haven't been writing about them for a while?
I did have to reread the books just to make sure I was, but of course I hadn't. No, I did. You do have to sort of read yourself back into it, but it takes a while to write a book, and they tend to inhabit your head fairly thoroughly as they do it. So that was all right. I do like revisiting characters, but in a kind of time-limited way. I would not, you know, people have repeatedly asked for a sequel to Think of England, but it's just, I'm not going to do that. It's just too late. I'm sorry, it's not happening. But it is fun to do, and you know, it's obviously a great temptation. But actually, I had to, because I've got a very wonderful and lively Facebook group, and when because it's Daniel De Silva, who's a sort of spy and has become a spy master, and when he turns up in the Will Darling Adventures, he turns up as the boss. And some people were discussing and saying what's happened to Archie, and then someone said, oh my god, maybe he died in the war. And everyone like, no, oh my god, Archie died in the war. Archie did not die in the war. Why would I do that? Oh my god. What kind of rotten romance author do you think I am? So I actually had to make it canon that he was all right. just so I didn't have to get asked that again, you know.
Oh, that's funny. I mean, as a historical romance writer, you do have to, you make stuff up, but you also, we talked about this a little bit earlier, you make stuff up, but you also, I've learned so much about history through reading romance because the research is phenomenal.
Yeah, and it's I mean, I've learned a huge amount through writing it, but it's also, I mean, it's good to do, but the thing is, it is absolutely the engine that drives books, as far as I'm concerned. I don't really, I don't want to write in a sort of pink cloud of sort of the sort of happily no research thing, because I get everything from my research. Like An Unnatural Vice is, I knew roughly what was going to happen, but actually the whole plot and everything and the whole structure of it came together from the fact of the really appalling fog that happened in that year, which was just far, far worse than you can imagine, and just the details of it are jaw-dropping. I mean, I quote this a lot, but during the fog that happens in that book, Mark Twain was in London and he was supposed to be appearing, doing a public speaking thing, and he was in a theatre and he was standing on the stage doing his speech and he couldn't see the front row of the stalls. I mean, that's inside, and that is the level of the fog. It was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's and I then you get the scene from that, and then you like spin out the rest of the plot forwards and backwards and so on. So yeah, I find that it's really important to do the research, because it just gives me so many good ideas and so many of the ways the plot can leap off in different directions. It's like having the geography as well. My current book is about smuggling on Romney Marsh, which is a really weird part of Kent, and it's so much of the plot is again being driven by facts, and I'm working around it, and it helps you make decisions. It helps you see where people are and where they're coming from and where they're going.
Mm-hmm. So we actually have a couple of comments in the chat that I think are really interesting. Gabriella says, men talking about their feelings, it seems revolutionary in more ways than one. And Stacy says, can I just say that I adore the way you write consent? I think that's really, I think that's something that's obviously people consider it super important. And it is super important, but you can do it in a lot of different ways, which I find fascinating. And again, it's such a useful tool when you're writing sex scenes, because we all know that sex scenes shouldn't be skippable. They should advance the plot, advance the character, tell us something. And consent is such a brilliant way to do that, because it really tells you about how, going back to power imbalance, negotiation, how people listen to one another. I mean, all of that is consent, isn't it? So, it's not a thing where people go, yes, we have wokely agreed that sex is on the agenda. It's literally the most intimate possible revelation of yourself to another person. Mm-hmm.
So right. Yeah, that's super important.
Actually,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Allison.
Oh, you have to be the only author that has like a consent where they have to like translate Latin verbs in their head like that.
Oh, makes it sound kind of like an exam. Sorry, no, it's a password. You don't actually get anything until you can unlock. Yeah, no, it's not quite like that. Yeah, no, I enjoyed that. My Latin got a bit of a workout. I haven't done it since I was 16.
That's so funny. But one of the things I said to Gabriella in the chat was that we had a really interesting conversation in our book club about toxic masculinity and how it really doesn't show in your books. And we're like, what, what was missing, from the hetero books that we were reading that we didn't miss? And it was that toxic masculinity.
I mean, there's a lot, I think, more awareness. I mean, you could do an entire history of the romance genre and how writers have been attempting to deal with toxic masculinity through the 80s, and effectively taking all these toxic heroes and then making them grovel and making them apologize and making them dedicate themselves to women, and the slow move towards saying, or we could just not have toxic men in the first place, which took a long time to come as as a genre. There are many sociological theses to be written about this, but there's some absolutely wonderful authors writing, and because a lot of people, I have heard a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to read MF because male-female romance because of toxic masculinity, but there's so many really good people writing at the moment. Talia Hibbert, for example, you've got the most wonderful heroes, and they're not all necessarily cinnamon rolls, but they're just decent human beings who listen. My God, is that so much to ask?
We're actually reading Talia Hibbert books for our next romance book club.
Oh, brilliant. I mean, she's wonderful.
I cannot wait.
All of them, absolutely adore them.
Yeah, me too. So I think there's another question next, and then we'll get to, I have a question, then Allison has questions, and we'll get to questions from the attendees. So we're big fans of your audiobooks. How involved are you in the process of making the audiobooks and choosing the narrators?
Not, basically. And the reason for that is that I don't actually listen to audiobooks. Well, I mean, in the car, but I don't have, it's not a way I like to read. And that's not a diss against audiobooks, it just doesn't work for me. Possibly because I'm a ridiculously, implausibly fast reader. And I actually get quite frustrated at the speed of audiobooks. So I just don't listen to them. So I have absolutely no means of judgment. And I realized when I started doing them, people were like, tell me which narrator you prefer. And I was like, I have no idea how to judge this. So at one point I was literally sending all the samples off to someone who does audio reviews and so saying, who would you have? And then I just thought, what, the people who are doing these are experts. So I pretty much go in there and I say, look, it's actually got to be somebody who's British, because you can really mostly tell if it isn't. But other than that, and a few things where I've sort of made stipulations, I let the experts get on with it. And I'm actually going to be doing an Audible original, so that's going to be coming out end of next year. So it'll be out in audio first, and I'm writing it very much with audio in mind. But it's going, so I will be working very directly with Audible on that, but they're absolutely taking the lead on all the sort of choice stuff because they know what they're doing.
Right, of course.
Know your limits, that's what I say.
I'm a huge audiobook reader. I listen to books I've already read, so it's my way of rereading.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know a lot of people who do, because the thing is, I don't have a commute, I don't drive, and well, I mean, I do drive, but I don't drive anywhere in particular because I don't have a commute, and I just think there's no situations in which I would be listening to audiobooks. And if I go for a walk, it's usually because I want to shake something loose in my head rather than, so it's just not a thing I have time for. Maybe when I'm older, I will go and discover them separately.
But your books are all fantastically narrated. I have to say, like Cornell Collins or Matthew Lloyd Davies, they're fantastic. He does them perfectly. I mean, just that they're really enjoyable. I love reading them, but also the audiobooks are just,
No, he gets so much praise. I can see it because I've sort of listened to snippets and I just think, this is fantastic. But I suffer from the thing that a lot of authors do where if it's my own words, it's hide behind a sofa. I just can't. Amy Jo Cousins was saying she's got exactly the same thing. You just cannot listen to it. So, I've listened to him doing scenes. I thought, wow, that's really amazing. And then I've got, okay, I can't listen to it anymore. But I'm so impressed because I write these things where there's 8 different people talking and he manages it. I'm like, how do you even do that? Although I did write a line in a book recently about a character whose accent was somewhere between sort of American and York and London, and he just sent me an email going, what? And I was like, it's all right, he doesn't have any dialogue.
Was that it, Allison?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. I actually have one last question that was Hannah's actually, and it was kind of one of my favorites. What is your favorite writing, snack, or drink?
Right, I'm really sad about this because it's tea, obviously. Unfortunately, I've basically had to cut right back on my caffeine consumption because it became apparent that apparently you're not supposed to drink 9 cups a day when you're in your 40s because apparently that doesn't do your sleep or whatever any good. So I'm now down to 1 mug of real tea a day. which I just think isn't fair. So I'm depending on rooibos tea a lot, basically. And I'm lucky because we've got apple trees in the garden. So at the moment I'm scoffing fresh apples off the tree quite a lot of the time. But mostly it's tea fueled, fake tea fueled.
Sorry.
Not fair.
I have to say, you're still writing fantastically despite the lack of caffeine.
You get over it eventually, as long as you don't try and quit it wholesale. Because I did actually try and quit wholesale at one point. Never had a hangover like it. I mean, like proper come down, headache that felt like someone's drilling through your brain. Absolutely astounding. I had to start drinking caffeine again because the pain just wasn't going away. A bit worrying when you think about it.
It is. Oh man, I'm gonna have to. Oh, I'm never gonna give up coffee, so it doesn't really matter.
One
I
cup.
don't have to write. I just have to check books out, so I'm good. Okay, so we have a bunch of really good questions from our attendees. So I'm just going to go through them in order. Somebody asked, have any of your books ever been optioned for films or television because they think that The Magpie Lord, which I agree with, would make an amazing Netflix series?
Okay, so the answer is that is something that is currently being explored, and I can't say anything else about that. But it's yeah, that's literally all I can say. But that is a thing which, anyway, moving swiftly on. I'm really not.
Okay, we'll pretend that never happened. Okay, would you consider writing a romance novel with a transgender character? And I feel like you have.
I have. I've got well, it's a novella, but it's the first of the Lady White Boys. You've got Christiana. It's called The Ratcatcher's Daughter, and that's actually an ace romance, and she's a music hall singer. And there's an Unsuitable Heir where one of the main characters is non-binary. I would like to do again, I like to write about people, so that is sort of something I'm working through. But it's also, it's the difficulty of writing it in the historical setting and making the world kind enough, if you know what I mean. Because it's always difficult. The daily difficulties. I don't want to make them more. You've got to make it work. Got to make it the right story, and I've got to make it a safe space and so on. So it's just finding the right era. The right era would work really well. I'm just sort of tossing around ideas as to what that would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is generally what I hear, is that like it's the story that it's this combination of story and character. You have to fit in puzzle pieces.
The right one. I think there'd be like E.E. Ottoman writes amazing historical trans characters.
Who? I'm sorry, who?
E.E. Ottoman. He's a trans guy who is, oh gosh, you haven't read. So The Companion, it's this like 20th century upstate New York, like cottagecore. Does that mean anything to you? It's a thing apparently. No, it's like sort of Thoreau, but not being an idiot. You're living in a cottage and being self-sufficient, and it's got this poly relationship, and it's terrific. But the Doctor's Dilemma, which is set in, I think, 1880s New York, with a trans lead. I think it's really good. Yeah, you should definitely read E.E.
I'm looking it up right now. I'll put it in the chat. I do have to say, although we moved on from the film question, that people are like, yes, Charm of the Magpies.
It would be nice. It would be nice. It's absolutely not a guaranteed thing, because the whole thing is, complicated and stagey and so on and so forth, and there's many millions of things. But
well, somebody did vote for Think of England, just if you need to like throw that into the mix.
I get no say. So I don't know what anyone's asking me.
That's okay. That's all right. Just wanted to put it out there. Okay. So when we were speaking of Subtle Blood, is there any update on when the audiobook will be coming out? I love the audio versions of the first two.
It's totally on it. So this is 100% my fault, okay? Because normally you get the manuscript to the publisher like the audio publisher like 4 months in advance, and then it all gets done. But if you're crap and you can't write the book, and you've taken 4 months and you've already delayed publication once already, and you actually are still editing it up to 10 days before you release the damn thing, then it turns out that the audio gets delayed. So yeah, it's coming, gosh, I think it's the end of the year. I think it's November or December. They plotted it in as fast as they could, but it's entirely the fact that it took me so long to get the manuscript done. And I didn't want to delay the publication of the EPUB any longer, because I'd already delayed it once.
Okay, so no exact numbers there.
I think there is an exact one, but I can't remember what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's November or December.
Okay, I'm actually not finding that author on I'm gonna quick Google search.
EE initials and then OTTOMAN.
OTT.
Someone's just put it up.
Okay, I'll put a link in if somebody wants to put a link on, that would be great.
Companion Doctor's Discretion, not Doctor's Dilemma. That's George Burns.
Oh, no wonder.
Sorry, beg your pardon. Doctor's Discretion.
I'm so all over this. Okay, moving on from me. Helen asks, and this is a question that is really important, I think, is could you talk about writing intimacy? I love the way that your books have well negotiated and pretty realistic for romance novels, at least scenes of intimacy. And this sort of goes back to my original question about like a woman writing male characters and, getting the intimacy right between two male characters.
I don't even know how much gender has to come into it there. I think it's a question, it's a question of character. I mean, character, we say plot is character in action, but actually action is character in action. So you're looking at, how much are people giving of themselves? What have they got to hide? What are they scared of? What are they hoping for? What do they need? And is that the same thing as what they want? And are they going to ask for it? Or, and it's all those kind of things that I think make for really important intimacy. I mean, intimacy is vulnerability, really, isn't it? And, sometimes some sex scenes feel like super vulnerable, and some of them feel, sometimes people are just having fun and they're more confident and so on. And again, that's a huge difference. So it really, the feel of intimacy just absolutely depends on where your characters are with one another and with themselves, and at what point in the plot, are they clinging together? There's a huge difference between writing a massive hate sex scene and writing, two people who are huddled together, and writing two people who are just having a massive laugh, enjoying and exploring one another, and all completely different kinds of intimacy. So yeah, it's I'm just trying to think if there's any particular aspects of that. Yeah, so I did sorry, I had a really intelligent thought which has kind of evaporated from my mind. But I think the main thing there is just, it's the assumptions. This is the thing that you get a lot in older romance novels, where one character, usually a male character with a woman or an experienced character with a less experienced one, makes an assumption about, I know what you're going to like, kind of thing. And that rubs me up the wrong way, really, really badly. And I think if there's one thing I would like to think that I hope I have never done it, and I hope I will never do it, because it just, that just grates fingernails down the blackboard of my soul, basically. That assumption, like, who do you think you are? Then how can you look at someone and say, oh, well, I know what you're going to like in bed? And it's much more interesting to like find out and discover and find the surprises, and explore together and find out what you like together, which, because the other thing is, very often in romance people have very, very peculiar sexual tastes, and then very specific rather sexual tastes, and then the other person has sexual tastes that absolutely happen to mesh with that. But it's also quite fun when you don't necessarily have that. Gilded Cage, which is an MF book I did, but the hero's got a definite kink for seeing his lover in opals, and she's just like, okay, that's weird, but I can live with it. You know, which is a perfectly reasonable stance to take. Whereas I think it would have been a bit distressing if I'd gone, oh yeah, actually, I've always had a thing about being draped in jewels. You know, we don't need that. We just need to be talking about it.
So actually, I thought that about Silas too in A Seditious Affair, was that he wasn't really a dominant. He was doing it because that's what Dominic needed.
He develops a taste. I mean, he does develop a bit of a taste for it, but it's because of the results he can get rather than because he actually particularly wants to go around doing these things. He likes the end result of it, which is obviously Dominic having this amazing time. But also, there's obviously Dominic being quite an extreme sub. You know, there's the first time they have an encounter, you know, in a brothel, there's all these whips and chains and whatever laid out, which Silas isn't going anywhere near because he's actually been flogged for real. And Dominic notices that, and after that, that's all just off the table. And Dominic has taken that right off the table because he doesn't want to cause pain. And, you know, that's actually a really important thing for them both. And I didn't see any way to negotiate that where Silas is going to discover a real enjoyment of flogging when he's actually had this genuinely horrible torture administered to him, you know. So that kind of negotiation, I think, tells you a great deal more. Well, someone's just mentioned the failure at role switching in Subtle Blood. I really enjoyed writing that. You know, not everyone enjoys, but it was actually, it was put into my mind by discussion on Twitter where people were saying, yeah, can you think of a romance where they start doing a new sexual act and it really doesn't work and they hate it? And I thought, no, but there should be some like that. Because, you know, a successful, healthy relationship ought to include, we tried a new thing, we didn't like it, we stopped. You know, that's actually a thing that people should be able to do and it not cause a problem.
Right. All about communication.
Yeah, so that was quite the right one.
So I actually have a little follow-up question to that too then. And not a question, but like, it seems to me like there's a, in your mind, and probably how it should be, is there's a difference between intimacy and vulnerability and the mechanics of sex. Like, yeah, you know, slot A, tab B kind of thing that happens in every, you know, romance novel that has sex in it. But, you know, you're talking about something different.
Yeah, I think the best sex scenes I've ever read have, it's not about the tab A slot B, because, you know, there's only so many orifices in the human body. Basically. You know, but there are, and there's, you know, if you're not going to do something new and exciting with a different position, because, you know, let's face it, humans have been working out the different positions and writing them down for a very long time. But yeah, it can really be a very, very sort of vanilla scene and still be incredibly moving and intimate. But it's what's going on in your head. Sex happens in your head, doesn't it? Let's be honest. The body's secondary. It's happening in your head. So that's I think the key to that for me.
Yeah, like this, I think your steam levels are exactly where I like my romance, but like my favorite sweet scenes, like the scenes that I'm swooning over, like in Think of England, like when Daniel's watching Archie read that book of poetry, right? Or Dom and Silas looking over the William Blake, you know, book and the illustrations, like those are the scenes. Or like Saul and Randolph, like having that conversation in the bar. Those scenes are so intimate. Like, yeah, exactly. Those are the ones that stick with you and make you swoon, or make me swoon.
Those are the points where you're bearing your soul and bearing your mind to someone, and, you know, trusting them with truths and connecting, like really connecting. So yeah, I think that's really important to do.
And I think that especially in this last year and a half where people have felt really disconnected, I was really glad to be reading your books during this time, because I always felt like that your characters found a way to connect with each other in many levels.
Yeah, I think that's what makes a really satisfying. That's what I'm always searching for when I'm reading romance. It's the people who are, who are doing that. And if it's, this is why I'm not a huge fan of romance novels where they're fighting all the way through, because it feels like still fighting even in the third act. Then you haven't connected properly, you're not listening properly, or possibly you actually don't like each other that much. So that's and then that doesn't fill me with hope. That's why I really admire people who can run series, multiple books with the same characters, because it's quite hard. It's hard to do. It's hard to make every individual book satisfying. But then 3 books is my maximum basically on that. I don't know how one would write a sort of 5-book series with the same lead characters and keep people believing in their relationship. I don't know how I'd do it anyway. Others can.
I have to say that I do read these longer run series, and you just wonder how are they going to possibly end this after 20, 30, however many books?
People handle it really well. The exemplar for me is Jordan L. Hawke's Wyborn and Griffin series, which I think runs to 12 books, and it's got a really big paranormal plot line and elements going through it. But they're a lovely couple, and you never doubt their love for one another, and it grows and develops like it's a marriage, and it all sort of holds together really well. But that's just not something I could do. It's a terrific exemplar of how you do it over a long thing. Have you read those?
I haven't, no, but I'm looking them up.
Go and read Widdershins at once, okay? One book, and then you can put 11 in a sort of big glom.
That's awesome. If somebody in the audience could put a link to that author in the chat, I would love it. So the next question is, I would love to hear your thoughts on how to make readers know so much about Kim's point of view without having his point of view, but without having his point of view, without having the readers be in their head. It was lovely.
What is this in the main? Because I used his point of view in How Goes the World, just sort of the epilogue thing quite briefly. Well, that's the. So I take it the question is how do you convey what if it's all told from one character's point of view, then how do you convey what the other one's thinking? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, how do you convey it without actually having
text? Well, that's one of the reasons I really enjoy writing just one character's point of view, because it's so much fun to do. One of the things is how much are you telling the reader versus how much the character knows and understands. So this is, I think it's one of the reasons people like Think of England, because in Think of England, the viewpoint character is mostly completely oblivious to what's going on, can't work out that the other guy's a spy or that he's gay or any of this, whereas the reader is sitting there going, oh my god, it's so obvious. So that's enormous fun to write, because you're laying all the clues for people to pick up and they're enjoying picking them up. With Kim, it was more difficult because we needed to keep a lot of stuff from Will and for the reader not to know it. But I think honestly the trick is that I knew exactly what he was thinking. I think that's actually fundamentally what it comes down to, that he might be an enigma to his love interest and even at points to the reader, but he was not an enigma to me. I knew exactly who he was. And I made sure that everything he said and everything he did was in tune with the person he was, which was this very slippery, shifty, quite badly damaged person. But you can't afford any characterization slippage if you're going to do that. You can't sort of have them behave in a certain way for plot purposes. You really have to be careful. And if you do that, then the consistency of it brings it across.
So a couple of comments. Marissa says that you're so good at that. In Any Old Diamonds, we know exactly what Jerry's feeling without ever being in his head. And I think I'm missing the next question. Oh, people are still giving me awesome recommendations for your authors.
Well, Any Old Diamonds is that was a really interesting one to write, because we're only in one character's head, but that character is not the most reliable of narrators anyway, and then you've got to see the other person only through his eyes. So that was quite a technical challenge to write that one. but I think it tells. I think you get a lovely extra layer of tension when you write single point of view. So there's a lot to be said for double point of view, because you know you can really get intimate with both characters. But the sort of tension and the uncertainty and the will they, won't they, or you know, what will the other person think, and what did he think, why did he do that? You can really build up in single point of view. So it is a favourite of mine, definitely.
Okay. Stacy asks, did you write Will Darling knowing that it would tie into Think of England, or did it just happen organically? Which ties into a question I have, which I ask all authors, is, are you a pantser or a plotter? Do you know these things ahead of time, or do you?
Well, this one actually, slightly weird story about this. So I knew that Kim was an agent working for a bureau, and I was fairly sure he worked. I have the private bureau, which already existed in Think of England. And then it occurred to me that Daniel from Think of England was now the boss of the private bureau, and I could bring him in, and I enjoyed doing that. And it was then pointed out to me that something like 2 years ago, I'd been having a running joke with some members of my Facebook group about exactly that. Somebody pulled up the thread, and there was a thread where I said, oh, but suppose it was about Ellen Gregory's book. I can't remember the name of the first one. The second one's called Midnight Flit, but she's got two absolutely excellent 1920s spy adventures. Ellen Gregory, Elin. So I recommend those. But we were just joking that her 1920s spy characters might meet my sort of older spy character, and I'd even come up, that's right, thank you, and I'd even come up with calling him DS, because spy chiefs like to go by their initials. You know, M in James Bond was based on the reality of Mansfield Cumming, who was known as C. So I decided that Daniel would be DS, Daniel De Silva. And all of this was just literally a joke in the Facebook group, and then 2 years later I wrote it, and people were like, oh, you remembered? And I was like, no, I forgot. But apparently my subconscious held on to that. So yes, so it was more closely linked than I had actually realised, possibly. That was a bit strange. These things happen.
But I think it's always interesting to hear like where these sparks come from.
Oh, you get some really weird ones. I mean, Spectred Isle came out of reading a weird Amazon review, which was unexpected. Yeah, someone wrote an Amazon review. It was a 2-line review that was just phrased in a really sort of oddly pompous way that made me imagine the kind of person who would leave this oddly pompous review of a ridiculous book about ley lines in London. And then that gave me the person that Saul worked for, and then the entire book spun out of this, just me imagining what kind of idiot would leave this stupid review. These things happen. I mean, I got the secret casebook of Simon Fexamel, as I've told before, but that's entirely based on my son putting fridge magnets randomly on the fridge and spelling out the word Fexamel by accident, and me just finding it absolutely necessary to work out what kind of character would be called Fexamel. And you know, you get a book out of that. It's weird. It's really weird.
But I think you have to, you know, like I would see the same thing you do and not think anything of it. So like I think it has something to do with maybe the writing brain or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously loads of things that I wander past obliviously. It's just something that, you know, we all get it, but one thing that just snags in your brain and it won't, you know, you just keep thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fairness, this magnets were on the fridge for like a week or something. When you see it often enough. But yeah, I get things and they snag, and then sometimes they sort of break loose, and other times they sort of accrete other things to it, and things start to fit together, and you think, oh, okay, where it's all coming from.
I did wonder about that because it seemed like such an unusual name. So now I thought maybe it's a family name, or you know,
no, it's literally a random selection of fridge magnets that my son arranged when he was pre-verbal. So you know, yeah, pure chance.
That's so awesome. Okay, so this is kind of a long question. Many of your books seem to be about masculine characters, masculine feminine couplings, or masculine and sort of medium masculine couplings, with a few exceptions. Yay for twink queens, Justin, Jonah, and Daniel, and all the love to pen. Do you have plans to write more femme presenting gender non-conforming characters in the future, or perhaps even a femme couple?
Okay, I have to admit, I don't actually, my plans at the moment are to survive having enthusiastically signed contracts this year.
Yay, more books.
Yeah, so that's not okay, so I'll also be honest and say this isn't how, I know people often say, are you going to write more FF, are you going to write NB characters, whatever. It's actually not how I sort of approach thinking about this. It's more the situation develops and the character is called for, and you know, so possibly if the right situation comes along is the answer, or you know, or if a character comes into my head and then I'll develop the situation from there. But I kind of like to I don't sit down thinking I'm going to write this kind of book. That's never happened.
Interesting. Amanda asks or says, Spectred Isle was listed as Green Men book #1. Will we actually be seeing any more Green Men books? Because I adore Saul and would love to see what happens to him.
Yeah, I know. I'm really sorry. It was meant to be a trilogy, and the problem was I wrote it very happily, and it's about you know, the post-war thing and the veil between the worlds is being ripped and things are starting to go all terribly wrong. And then I finished writing it in 2016 when everything did in fact start to go terribly wrong, and I just couldn't summon up the strength to write about a world going terribly wrong, because it was, you know, to the world even going terribly wronger than this one. And like, if things stopped going terribly wrong for us, maybe I could get the mojo back. But yeah, I just stalled really badly. I made something like 10 attempts to write book 2, and I just thought I'm going to have to stop doing this. It's just, I can't do it. I've got the start of book 2, I've got the start of book 3. I can't at the moment. I'd love to, because I love the world, I love the characters, but I just can't at the moment.
Oh, okay. I actually have some questions from Facebook. I hadn't seen them. Meredith asks, do you have a particular starting place for developing your characters?
Again, no, it's really dependent on the situation, and it's quite, you know, most of my books have some weird origin story, like the ones I've just cited. So it can come from what kind of person has a name like this, or what kind of person is in a situation like this, or here's one person, what's the absolute worst possible love interest they could have, or you know, anything like that. Yeah, so there is no one starting place.
It's exciting, because otherwise it would be kind of boring.
Well, I don't, you know, it's not a kind of roll the dice D&D character process at all. It's more, I mean, so I've been a bit slow with the one I'm writing at the moment, because I knew exactly who one character was, but the second one, it took me absolutely ages to pin him down, mainly because I thought it was going to be this very hostile relationship. There's a smuggler, and I thought the other guy is going to be this sort of magistrate, and it's going to be this real head-butting kind of, but it's totally not. The other guy's actually really sweet, but no, he's not sweet, actually. He's not sweet at all. He's actually quite thin now I think about it. He's not he's quite brittle, and he's yeah, so he's difficult, and I'm still like writing myself into it, or writing myself into it. So it was quite hard, but that's a tricky bit, actually getting them both pinned down, and it can often take a while.
Mark says, thank you so much for Band Sinister. The seduction and consent so important. Was a sequel ever on the cards?
I don't think so. I thought about it, but I actually think that the way it's ended up, the way we leave it, is basically, you know, Corvin and John are going to carry on very happily as they are, with Philip in and out, and you know, that's how they're all. That's how they're very comfortable. So I don't think there's going to be a sequel.
Okay, sad. Now I'm sad. Okay, so sort of we're getting to the end here. So people I know are thinking, oh, well, how long is it going to be? But we're getting to the end. Your book recommendations are so great. I read Doctor's Discretion and Widdershins and many others because of you. Do you have any particular books that you like to recommend? Your favorite books that you like to recommend?
Oh golly, I mean, I've got sort of my favourite authors kind of thing who I recommend a lot. Therese Bahari, Alexis Hall, Talia Hibbert, again Jordan Hawke, who I have, but May Peterson, who's terrific, and I loved. There's a new author called Penny Ames who's just written a trans romance called For the Love of April French, which I highly recommend. It's like the most cinnamon roll DS kink you'll ever read. It's really nice. But yeah, things I read a lot. As I say, I read really fast. So if you're interested in my recs, you can actually follow me on Goodreads, where I review basically everything as I go. And you can see just how bizarre and eclectic my tastes are.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I know Allison's writing this down, so I will be sending out a recap to everybody who's here with these recommendations and names and links and everything. So if you're not as fast as Allison in writing things down, we'll get to you. So what's up next for you? I know that Allison had asked you about your next book, but are you in the process of like other?
Yeah. So the three things that are happening next. There's the Audible original that I mentioned. So that's going to be a Regency about a Stonybrook Earl who recruits a thief to help him steal a priceless jewel. And that is going to be coming next October. So that's going to be good fun. And then I've also signed, because I've been self-publishing up until now, but I signed with Source Books to do a pair of books about smugglers on Romney Marsh in Kent. And I'm 60,000 words into the first draft of the first one, which is nice. And they are going to be coming out, oh gosh, I think it's going to be September 22, and then sort of 6 months later kind of thing. So those are my contracted books. And then I've got a 1950s story absolutely itching to be written. So whether I will get that out, it depends how fast I can do all the contracted books. So there may be a massive lag in my publishing. Well, because of publishing, all these three books are going to be coming from publishers, so they've all got these huge lead times. And I have been self-publishing, so there may be massive lag, or I might get a book in there. It just depends how fast I'm writing and how inspired I feel.
Well, we'll be looking forward to them no matter what lag, or we'll keep an eye on it. So we'll be following you on Goodreads, because also because we got some really wonderful recommendations. My to be read pile is just like growing behind me as I speak. It's going to fall over soon.
Shocking. I've got 60 in my Kobo at the moment. It's absolutely full.
That's what we should do. We should have a program on like what's on your
really good, actually.
Yeah.
Get authors to compare their TBR files. That's actually a really good idea. You should totally do that.
Oh, I'm writing it down. That's gonna be my January program. That's so funny. Okay, well, thank you so much, KJ, for this. This has been wonderful. I have learned so much, and like I said, TBR pilot growing, but just getting a sense of how your mind works around these books that we have really, really been enjoying for the last couple of years is just phenomenal. Allison, would you like to say anything as we leave?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. We've hours of enjoyment reading all your books, enjoying them. So it's really great to talk to you and just hear more about them.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Absolutely my pleasure.
Well, it was a thrill when you wrote back to me. I remember I wrote back to my romance book club and I was like, oh my God. So I want to thank everybody who's here and listening in on Facebook and on, in the Zoom. And remember, you can buy signed books by KJ from Bank Square Books for this program. And I hope you have many, many hours of happy reading in the next few months. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Yep. Have a great day, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to stop the live stream.